Well, Patrick, on Suits, you play Mike Ross. He's a brilliant guy, but he's a college dropout for various reasons. One question I had right off the bat, sometimes when I've seen actors play brilliant characters, they can also come across as arrogant, but I don't think yours does. How do you walk that fine line between brilliance and arrogance?
That's a really good question, actually, and one that no one's ever asked. I think that because of Mike's position in the world and kind of how he's scraping the bottom of the barrel when you find him at the beginning of the show, I think that arrogance, while it might have been there at one point, and it definitely exists in him, the ability to kind of be a wise ass, I think it's probably been kind of beaten out of him through a series of events that have taken place over his life. He's lost his parents, I think he's so shamed that he's so smart and so capable and yet hasn't accomplished any of the things that he had set out to accomplish for himself, and many of the things that I imagine his parents who are no longer with him would have wanted for him. So I think shame and arrogance are probably pretty mutually exclusive sometimes, or maybe not. Maybe certain people can kind of facilitate both. But I think Mike is at a point where he's really not satisfied with himself, and you find him at that unique place at the beginning of the show when he's really admitting that to himself, and he knows that he's got to get his act together, which is what I appreciated so much about the show from the beginning, that it wasn't a typical character who was just smarter than everybody and knew everything and was the coolest person in the room all the time. I mean, he was a guy who had a lot of work to do, and you were kind of catching him at the bottom. Even though he has this amazing gift, this amazing ability, he still has a lot of work to do. And then Harvey comes along and sort of shows him that he's capable and takes a chance on him.
I'm curious to know, given that this is your first real starring role in an ongoing series, how it came about that you got the role, and what were your initial reactions to the relatively novel premise of the show?
Mike Ross may be the most brilliant legal mind in New York.
Did you get through all those files in one night?
Well, I would have done it faster, but I ordered a pizza.
But he doesn't have much experience.
You haven't even gone to any law school.
I'm sorry, what?
So he's teaming up with the city's most successful attorney.
We're gonna have some fun.
Because the one thing Mike doesn't know about the law is how to be a lawyer.
Can you show me how to fill out a subpoena?
My initial reaction to the show was just yes. I mean, I had a really tough year first professionally. I had been fired from a pretty high-profile job, a few months before, and was really in that place where, like Mike Ross, I was bottom of the barrel. I was ready to sort of quit doing what I was doing. I didn't have a lot of faith in myself or my ability. And so when I read this script, like we just talked about, I saw a character that was so imperfect. And even though he had these amazing gifts that on any other show would just be, he solves crimes with his brain, and we'd do that every single episode, and that would be great. It wasn't that. It was a guy who really didn't believe in himself, and it resonated with me so deeply. So, and this idea of somebody coming into your life and being a mentor to you in that way was just really valuable to me. And so it was an easy thing for me to slip into. And then what was the first part of your question?
Well, just how you really came to the role. What's the process, just for people always curious when you get your first big starring role, how it all really happens and comes about?
It's kind of funny because I was watching your interview with Gabriel, and it's so funny because we both, in so many ways, Gabriel's very different than Harvey Specter, but even the way we came to this show is, he came from somebody who's been doing so much great work for so long, and, he made the conscious decision to sort of go into television, and so he got this part which he really liked. While for me, on the other end, it was the much more typical, nobody really knew who I was. I had to go into a room at least, 12 times to read these scenes, so there's just audition after audition after audition. So you have what's a pre-read, which is when you're just with the casting director, and then you move up to the producers. Then maybe they do another one with some more producers. Then you have a work session, and then they decide if they're going to test you or not. So they take you to the studio and the network. So you're constantly just going into rooms with bigger and bigger and bigger and more important people. Who are going to decide your fate. And the entire time we were using the interview scene from the pilot, where I'm telling Harvey Specter that I'm worth it, and that I can do this job, and that I'm ready, and that this is my time. And so every one of those auditions, every one of those steps, I really just centered myself and made sure that I was talking from a very honest place, because at the time after being fired, I felt very much like Mike Ross, and I was sitting in those rooms just telling these people, I'm ready for this job. I know this guy inside out, and I can do this. And so when Gabriel and I came together finally from these two different perspectives, like so much of that energy and that relationship was already so in place. And I think that that's a big reason for why we get along so well and why the chemistry works out so well.
Sounds a lot like a reality show. You could have been voted off at any moment along the way.
I mean, it's a grind. It's a real, it's so funny because this is a pretty glamorous part of the job, which I've never experienced before, to be on a show like this and the posters and the buses and just, all that stuff and talking to people like yourselves. It's, a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, to be completely unemployed, to not sure how you're going to pay your rent, to not know if you're even in the right business. You've convinced yourself for so long that this is what you want to do, but you never really know. And to sort of have that validation a little bit right now. And that being said, in 4 years I might be right back in the same place, but to be able to experience this and understand what it is to actually be part of something that people are responding to in a major way, it's a pretty special thing.
We've had a lot of guest roles over the last decade. I wanted to ask about one, but I also wanted to ask you if any particular one stood out. But as soon as I saw your posters for Suits, I immediately said, "Oh, that's Peter from Lost." Because I was a big Lost fan. Is that maybe the one episode of all the guest stuff that you did, The Man from Tallahassee, that got you the most attention?
It got me a lot of attention. I mean, mainly, I would challenge you to a Lost fan-off. I was the biggest. My ringtone when I went on that show was the sound from the beginning of Lost. Dissonant. And so I was in a makeup trailer. My phone went off, and I had to quickly grab it and turn it off. There were all these weird the Dharma VW van was parked somewhere, and I was asking, what is that? When's that going to come up? For me, that episode was just me trying to keep my cool as much as possible and pretend like I was a professional rather than just sit there and salivate for getting to talk to John Locke, But it definitely got me a lot. I actually got a couple of independent films where both of them said, we saw your work in Lost, and we thought, that's a guy who could do this job. So it's gotten me a lot of attention. That and Friday Night Lights, which is a terrific show, and a lot of people love that show. So,
what can you tell us about your upcoming role or involvement on the eagerly anticipated Luck?
I think I have to be pretty careful about what I do on that. With those guys, I do not want them coming and hunting me down. But the I can say is that that my character works closely with Dustin Hoffman's character, and Michael Gambon and Dennis Farina. They were the three that I was kind of really in that world and that particular string of the story. Doing work with them, and it was just a master class. I mean, I got to work with three of the greatest living actors around, and I spent most of my time on set just trying to keep my food down and to breathe and to pay attention and to learn as much as possible. I mean, I was just on that thinking, you so rarely get this opportunity as an actor, and I was still really in that. Every job I get now, it's am I going to get fired or not? There's that 1 hour window where I don't know if I'm getting fired or not. Yeah. And I really had to calm myself down throughout shooting that show and just go, even if I get fired, I'm going to learn as much as possible right now. I'm going to watch Dustin Hoffman do what he does. And it was fantastic. And I think it's going to be an incredible show. I mean, you've got so many people on that show with such amazing talent. And the writing is just unbelievable. So, all I can say is that I work closely with Dustin's character and he hires me to do some work and we work together.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Dustin Hoffman, Nick Nolte, Joan Allen. You've got David Milch behind the scenes, Michael Mann behind the scenes. Why can't you find anybody talented to work with?
I was sitting at those table reads. I'd show up to a table read and just look around that table, and there would be was it John C. McGinley too? He plays a small part in the show. You know, he's a great actor. And when you sit at a table read, you've got all like the main players seated around the table, and then you've got like people like myself in the show that it's like clearly you're not going to be sitting at the main table. You're not a regular. So you're going to sit on the outskirts. Mm-hmm. And when you go to a table read and you've got John C. McGinley sitting on the outskirts next to you, you know, or it was always like that. There were just these amazing actors who were not even in the middle of this thing. I mean, it was a room full of talent that I had never sort of been around, and you know, like I said, it's all a learning experience. And working with Gabriel is the same thing. You know, he's been doing it for so long that I think that's part of why the show pops so much. Is that as Mike, I just sort of spend a lot of time wide-eyed and trying to learn as much as humanly possible, as quickly as possible, because I feel like I'm going to get caught and tossed out of this thing if somebody knows what's really up. So I'm on set all the time, just sort of trying to keep my cool and keep my nose down and do the work and hope that it all works out, which it seems to be so far. So
yeah,
so far so good.
Well, it's obviously hit a nerve. Suits is doing very well for USA, and we've noticed that you've done a few SAG screenings and Q&As and things like that. So it looks like that it's, you know, really seeping into you know, everyone's consciousness. And hopefully it will keep going. You've got season 2 coming up, and we wish you all the best for that and for the upcoming award season.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're so excited about how well the show's done and how people respond. So we're so excited to get back to work and do it all over again, hopefully.